If you like this video, please give a thumbs up and subscribe. Hit the bell icon to be notified of new videos. Nukes inexplicably disabled during dramatic 1967 incident by Jim Klotz and Robert Salas. What follows is the story of extraordinary events that happened in 1967 to U.S. Air Force Strategic Air Command missile combat officers and other enlisted personnel. Missileers assigned at facilities in Montana to operate, maintain, and protect the Minuteman intercontinental ballistic missiles, an essential part of America's Cold War strategic nuclear deterrent. In central Montana, on a March morning in 1967, Strategic Air Command missile combat officers Captain Eric Carlson and First Lieutenant Walt Figel, of the Echo Flight Missile Combat Crew, were below ground in the E-Flight Launch Control Center between Winfred and Hilga, 15 miles north of Lewistown. Missile maintenance crews and security teams had camped out at two of the launch facilities, having performed work there the previous day and then stayed overnight. During the early morning hours, more than one report came in from security patrols and maintenance crews that they had seen UFOs. A UFO was, in fact, reported directly above one of the E-Flight silos. At least one security policeman, it later turned out, was so affected by this encounter that he never again returned to missile security duty. Around 8:30 a.m., Deputy Crew Commander Figel was briefing Carlson, the crew commander, on the flight status when the alarm horn sounded. One of the Minuteman missiles they supervised had strangely gone off alert. It became inoperable. The off alert occurred at one of the two sites where maintenance crews had camped out on site. Upset, thinking maintenance personnel had failed to notify him that the missile was going to off-alert status, as required when maintenance work is done on a missile, Figel immediately called the missile site. When Figel spoke with the on-site security guard, the guard reported that maintenance had not yet been performed that morning. He also stated that a UFO had been hovering over the site. Figel recalled thinking the guard must have been drinking something. However, incredibly, now other missiles started to go off alert in rapid succession. Within seconds, the entire flight of 10 Icbms was down. All of the missiles reported a no-go condition. One by one, across the board, each missile had become inoperable. When the checklist procedure had been completed for each missile site, it was discovered that each of the missiles had gone to off-alert status due to a guidance and control system fault. Power had not been lost to the sites, the missiles simply were not operational because, for some unexplainable reason, each of their guidance and control systems had malfunctioned. Two security alert teams, SAT or strike teams, were dispatched from Echo to those sites where the maintenance crews were present. Figel had not informed the strike teams that one of the on-site guards had reported a UFO. On arrival at the launch facilities, though, the SAT reported that all of the maintenance and security personnel present at each site had seen UFOs hovering over each of the two sites. Captain Don Crawford's crew relieved the Echo Flight crew later that morning. Crawford recalls that both Carlson and Figel were still visibly shaken by what had occurred. Crawford also recalled that the maintenance crews worked on the missiles the entire day and late into the night during his shift to bring them all back to alert status. Not only had missiles been lost to our deterrent forces, but they had remained out of service for an entire day. Because of this unique incident, as an ex-missiler describes it, all hell broke loose. Among the many calls to and from the E-Flight Launch Control Center, one was to the crew commander of Oscar Flight, located a mile or two south of the town of Roy, about 20 miles southeast of Echo Flight, where that same morning another equally dramatic story unfolded at an ICBM launch center, Oscar Flight. In the following account, Robert Salas, the deputy crew commander in Oscar Flight, recalls the events of that unusual morning. My recollection, reports Robert Salas, Oscar Flight's deputy crew commander, is that I was on duty as a deputy missile combat crew commander below ground in the LCC Launch Control Center during the morning hours, the probable date being March 24, 1967. Outside, above the subterranean LCC capsule, it was a typical clear, cold Montana night sky. There were a few inches of snow on the ground, and no city lights to detract from the spectacular array of stars, the kind of night when it was not uncommon to see shooting stars. Montana isn't called Big Sky Country for no reason, and airmen on duty topside probably spent some of their time outside looking up at the beautiful night sky. It was one of those airmen who first saw what appeared to be a star zigzag across the sky. Then he saw another light do the same thing, but this time it was larger and closer. He asked his Flight Security Controller, FSC, the non-commissioned officer in charge of Launch Control Center site security, to come and take a look. They both stood there watching the light streak directly above them, stop, change directions at high speed and return overhead. The NCO ran into the building and phoned me at my station in the underground capsule. He reported to me that they had been seeing lights making strange maneuvers over the facility and that they weren't aircraft. I replied, "Great. You just keep watching them and let me know if they get any closer." I did not take this report seriously and directed him to report back if anything more significant happened. At the time, I believed this first call to be a joke. Still, that sort of behavior was definitely out of character for air security policemen whose communications with us were usually very professional. A few minutes later, the security NCO called again. This time he was clearly frightened and was shouting his words, "Sir, there's one hovering outside the front gate." "One what?" "A UFO. It's just sitting there. We're all just looking at it." "What do you want us to do?" "What? What does it look like?" "I can't really describe it. It's glowing red." "What are we supposed to do?" "Make sure the site is secure and I'll phone the command post." "Sir, I have to go now, one of the guys just got injured." Before I could ask about the injury, he was off the line. I immediately went over to my commander, Lieutenant Fred Myvald, who was on a scheduled sleep period. I woke him and began to brief him about the phone calls and what was going on topside. In the middle of this conversation, we both heard the first alarm klaxon resound through the confined space of the capsule, and both immediately looked over at the panel of annunciator lights at the commander's station. A no-go light and 2 red security lights were lit, indicating problems at one of our missile sites. Fred jumped up to query the system to determine the cause of the problem. Before he could do so, another alarm went off at another site, then another and another simultaneously. Within the next few seconds, we had lost 8 to 10 missiles to a no-go, inoperable condition. After reporting this incident to the command post, I phoned my security guard. He said that the man who had approached the UFO had not been injured seriously but was being evacuated by helicopter to the base. Once topside, I spoke directly with the security guard about the UFOs. He added that the UFO had a red glow and appeared to be saucer-shaped. He repeated that it had been immediately outside the front gate, hovering silently. We sent a security patrol to check our LF's launch facilities after the shutdown, and they reported sighting another UFO during that patrol. They also lost radio contact with our site immediately after reporting the UFO. When we were relieved by our scheduled replacement crew later that morning, the missiles had still not been brought online by on-site maintenance teams. Again, UFOs had been sighted by security personnel at or about the time Minuteman's strategic missiles shut down. The investigation in-depth post-incident investigation of the E-flight incident was undertaken. Full-scale on-site and laboratory tests at the Boeing Company's Seattle plant were conducted. Declassified strategic missile wing documents and interviews with ex-Boeing engineers who conducted tests following the E-flight incident investigation confirmed that no cause for the missile shutdowns was ever found. Robert Kaminsky was the Boeing Company engineering team leader for this investigation. Kaminsky stated that after all tests were done, there were no significant failures, engineering data, or findings that would explain how 10 missiles were knocked off alert, and there was no technical explanation that could explain the event. The most that could be done was to reproduce the effects by introducing a 10-volt pulse onto a data line. Another Boeing Company engineer on the team, Robert Riggett, came up with this pulse that repeated the shutdown effects 80% of the time, but only when directly injected at the logic coupler. No explanation could be found for a source of such a pulse or noise occurring in the field and getting inside the shielded missile system equipment. Others on the engineering team checked other possibilities. Lightning and problems in the commercial power system were acquitted as the source of the problem. William Dutton, another Boeing Company engineer, checked commercial power interruptions and transients, and stated, no anomalies were found in this area. Several military activities and other engineering firms participated in the investigation, but no positive cause for the shutdowns was ever found, despite the extensive and concentrated effort. One conclusion was that the only way a pulse or noise could be sent in from outside the shielded system was through an electromagnetic pulse (EMP) from an unknown source. The technology of the day made generating an EMP of sufficient magnitude to enter the shielded system a very difficult proposition, requiring large, heavy, bulky equipment. The source of the actual pulse that caused the missile shutdowns remains a mystery to this day. Other sightings, according to articles from the Great Falls Tribune on February 8, 1967, Louis Delian saw 2 strange objects in the sky that did not look like airplanes, and they glowed an orange and red color while driving east of Chester, Montana. Later, 10 miles east of Chester, Jake Walkman was awakened by a bright light at his home. From his backyard, he sighted a flying saucer-shaped object. The next evening, George Kawanishi, a foreman for the Great Northern Railroad, saw a bright ball of light in the sky directly above the Chester train depot. These are but a few of the sightings which preceded the missile shutdown incidents in March. It was during this same time period, according to Colonel Don Crawford, USAF RET, that a 2-person strike team assigned to Echo Flight was performing a routine check of the missile launch facilities a few miles north of Lewistown. As they approached one of the launch facilities, an astonishing sight caused the driver to slam on his brakes. Stunned in amazement, they watched as about 300 feet ahead a very large glowing object silently hovered directly over the launch facility. One of them picked up his VHF hand microphone and called then Captain Don Crawford, who was the deputy crew commander on duty that evening. "Sir, you wouldn't believe what I'm looking at," he said. He described what they were seeing. Crawford didn't believe him at first, but the young airman insisted he was telling the truth, his voice revealing his emotional state. Eventually, Crawford took him seriously enough to call the command post to report it. The officer on duty at the command post refused to accept the report and simply stated, "We no longer record those kinds of reports," indicating he didn't want to hear about the UFO. Crawford, unsure of what to tell his shaken security guard, decided to give the guard his permission to fire his weapon at the object if it seemed hostile. "Thanks, sir, but I really don't think it would do any good." A few seconds later the object silently flew away. Several other sightings occurred in the area before and after the missile shutdown incidents by military personnel and civilians. National security. During March 1967, UFOs were sighted by security personnel at the Oscar Flight LCC and 10 Flight Launch Facility, and by other security and maintenance personnel at Echo Flight Launch Facility. These sightings were reported separately to the capsule crews at both launch control centers at or about the same time Minuteman strategic missiles shut down at both sites. USAF has confirmed that all of Echo Flight's missiles shut down within seconds of each other and that no cause for this could be found. For many years, the Air Force has maintained that no reported UFO incident has ever affected national security. It is fact that a large number of Air Force personnel reported sighting UFOs at the time many of our strategic missiles became unlaunchable. The incidents described above clearly had national security implications. In one previously classified message, SAC headquarters described the E-flight incident as loss of strategic alert of all 10 missiles within 10 seconds of each other for no apparent reason and a cause for grave concern. To SAC headquarters. A great discrepancy exists between the United States Air Force's public position relative to UFOs and national security, and the facts of this case. We urge the Secretary of the Air Force to search for, declassify, and release all information on this case. Robert Salas, the co-author with James Klotz of Fated Giant, the story of the 1967 nuclear missile-related UFO incidents in central Montana, served as a missile launch officer in the Minuteman missile program at Malmstrom Air Force Base from 1965 through 1967. He is a graduate of the United States Air Force Academy and served for 7 years before going on to earn his master's degree in aerospace engineering from the Air Force Institute of Technology. Salas also worked briefly as an engineer for Martin Marietta Aerospace and Rockwell International and then with the Federal Aviation Administration until his retirement in 1995. He currently teaches high school mathematics. James Klotz, a lifelong resident of the Puget Sound area of Washington, is the Computer UFO Network Information Director. A staunch advocate of openness in government, Klotz has filed more than 2,000 Freedom of Information Act requests on behalf of CUFIN and others, reprinted with permission from CUFIN, or note. Sci-Fi Channel's Sightings taped a segment dealing with this incident that aired originally in 1997 and several times afterward. Robert Salas first spoke publicly about the Oscar incident on the Art Bell show Dreamland on November 24, 1996. Since then he has spoken many times on various radio and television programs and at UFO conferences. On February 17, 2009, Robert Hastings, author of UFOs and Nukes, Extraordinary Encounters at Nuclear Weapons Sites, was interviewed on Coast to Coast AM, chronicling the ongoing sightings of UFOs at or near Montana's Malmstrom Air Force Base. He has interviewed over 90 people entrusted by the U.S. government with guarding, operating, or launching nuclear weapons, several of who were stationed at Malmstrom AFB, including Robert Salas, who say UFOs have monitored and occasionally shut down nuclear weapons systems in the United States. Hastings has interviewed eyewitnesses who reported having seen UFOs related to Malmstrom after 1967 and as recently as 2006. For a more detailed summary of this documentation, including quotes from the airmen involved, see ufohastings.com.